Hey, Rob.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Happy to be able to join you.
Are you able to get into the museum or is it closed?
Well, it's closed to the public.
Yeah,
The staff is occasionally going in.
yeah,
Every once in a while, there's something that, we're still trying to sort of prepare for when we reopen. So
right.
there's a few things with, getting new display cases, preparing a couple exhibits. So yeah, things like that.
Yeah, wow.
But yeah, I mean, we're coming up on a full
I,
year of being
I
closed
know.
here, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not going to end anytime soon. So
I know.
yeah, sad to say. But
Yeah,
how long has the university been fully remote?
well, since March, although I should say in the fall, we started having some small classes meeting live. So I actually have two classes that meet face to face. They thought they wanted to have freshmen on campus. And then, um, so I have two freshman classes that I'm teaching
Okay.
live. Although this week I had two students who tested positive. So
Wow.
yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with we weren't meeting in person because we had a lot of snow on. I mean, one advantage of this is if there is a weather issue, I can just have everything go remote.
Right. The end of snow days, at least for
That's
this
right.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So how long have you been at the museum?
Let's see. I started at the very end of 2014. So I'm working on my seventh year, I guess now
Wow.
it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, had you been in the Navy, or did you come through the museum route?
No, I was in the Army briefly. I
Oh,
did
really?
ROTC in college and was an officer for just a couple of years after school. But I went back to grad school for history and ended up getting into the museum field and
Oh, wow.
went kind of looking to
Yeah.
specialize in military history, although not
Wow.
naval
Yeah.
specifically. But
Yeah.
just because of the way the jobs opened up in museums,
Right.
I kind of got into the naval track. Yeah.
Oh, oh, good. Are you from Rhode Island?
No, I'm from Michigan originally,
Really?
but
Yeah.
I've lived out here now for since 2004, so it's
Okay.
it's home now. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, that happens. Yeah.
yeah. And you said there's 10 students in the
10
class here?
students, and Carl Herzog from the Constitution Museum usually joins us. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great. I saw he and I have talked about it on email. I haven't met him in person, but
Oh,
we've
really?
emailed about doing some programs together, including
Good.
wargaming, when the thing that I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
show here.
Oh,
So
that'll be great. Yeah.
eager to
Yeah.
talk to him about it too. Yeah.
Yeah, he was excited to hear you would be joining us because of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I see you. Yeah, you have a very appropriate background for the
Yeah.
subject.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I'm admitting students as they file in. So. I've only been to the museum once, I think. It's a great place. Uh, so
Yeah, in normal times, I would love to invite your class to come down and
yeah,
see us, and I hope eventually at some point in the
I
future we
know.
can. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we can
yeah.
at least put ourselves on your radar here.
That's right. Yeah. Carl?
Hey, Carl, good to see you in person, or at least virtually.
Well, since we're here, we might as well begin. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. And welcome back. We actually are really pleased to have with us this morning Rob Doan, who is the curator at the Naval War College Museum in Newport. He's originally from Michigan, studied history at the University of Michigan, where he was also in the ROTC program, and got a master's in public history at Loyola in Chicago, and then moved east pursuing public history. So he's worked at actually has worked at the USS Constitution Museum and at the MIT Museum, as well as the Beverly Robinson Collection at the Museum in Annapolis. And now for 7 years, he has been the curator of the Naval War College Museum, and he also maintains the Soundings blog for on Narragansett Bay history. So we're really happy to have you with us this morning, Rob. Thanks for joining us, and I'll let you get started.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here.
Oh, yeah.
And
let me make sure you can do that.
if you need to allow me to do that, yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
Up, I think I got it. All right, you seen it?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, yeah, thank you again for the invitation, and hello to everyone. I'm glad to be able to join this morning. It gives us something to do since our museum is sadly closed down, like most other museums in the country right now. But yeah, I wanted to give just kind of a overview of what our museum is about, and a few highlights of some of the artifacts and displays that we have going on right now. And then finish up by just talking a little bit about what we are doing right now that's different in terms of some of our online programs. So hopefully it gives you just a feel for what we do and what we're all about, since we are a museum that is not necessarily easy for everyone to get to, but I definitely want to let you know that we are open to the public, at least in normal times. So hopefully this plants the seed for, and maybe we're a resource that you'll find useful if you're ever doing research, or just need you know, a different venue for finding out something related to naval and maritime history. So this is us here. Our building is located in Newport on Naval Station Newport, and it's in the building that was the original building for the Naval War College when it opened in 1884. I'm gonna just quickly, I'm assuming, I don't know if you have all heard of the Naval War College. If you have, no. Yeah, Bob. Oh, Bob, I thought you were making a comment.
Feel free to tell us.
Yeah, okay. I assumed a lot of people have maybe heard of it, but aren't really quite sure what exactly goes on there, which I understand. So I'll start with a museum that I had worked with before, the Naval Academy. Probably more of you have heard of the Naval Academy. You kind of understand what that's all about. You know, when you're fresh as a freshman going into college and interested in being an officer in the military, you have the service academies, obviously, and that's kind of the traditional military school experience. So the Naval War College is not that. Sometimes we're confused with that, but we don't have you know, drill sergeants running around, people running obstacle courses. It's not that. The students at the college here are officers, but they're well into their careers. They've been in for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're basically, they've been identified as people who are on their way to kind of senior command positions within all the branches of the military. It's not just the Navy. But they are here for a year-long program to kind of study the—
Excuse me, Rob, is it just from the United States?
So it's not. It's not just military. They have civilians there from the State Department, the FBI, a couple other agencies, and then on top of that, yes, they do actually. In the 1950s, they started hosting international students too. Various countries that send officers from their military to come and study at the college. And at last count, it changes every year. I think at last count, it was something like 110 different countries. It's more than 100. I don't know the exact number right now, but it's pretty good representation. And sometimes pairings that you wouldn't expect to see. Frankly, it's kind of neat. I know there are stories of countries that are normally, maybe at least their governments are not exactly friendly to each other, but they do have students studying there together. And there are a few stories the colleges tell of sometimes international incidents or possible military confrontations have been avoided because of the fact that people who studied at the college together here found themselves on opposite sides when this incident was starting, and were able to kind of diffuse it by reaching out to each other and relying on those personal friendships they had built at the college. So that's a pretty cool thing if that can happen. But yeah, so the college, I basically described it to most people. It's sort of like the Navy's grad school. And in fact, it really is that today, because people who study there do get a master's degree out of it. They get a one-year master's degree in international security studies. So it's a school you get appointed to go to. You don't apply to it. It's not open for even for civilians. They basically have to receive orders to go there as part of their job or their training. So it's not a public university in that sense, but it's one step in the Navy's system of professional military education that it sends its officers, and the other branches do as well. So that's basically the college's story. And this little white building that you see on the opening slide here is where it all began. This building was actually built in 1820 as the poorhouse for the town of Newport, and it functioned as an asylum for the good first 60 years of its life or so. And in the 1880s, the Navy came in, decided to take this land and then bought it from the state of Rhode Island, and it was transferred to Navy ownership, and they used it to set up this school for higher level training for military officers. So this is a nice overhead view of where we are, that little arrow pointing to where the museum is. On the face of it, you look at this and think like, wow, we're in an awesome location. And I do get there every morning and think like, we probably have the best view out our front door of almost any museum on the East Coast. I feel lucky for that. But the flip side of that is that, as you can kind of look at and see here, we're located on an island inside the gate of a Navy base in a 200-year-old building that used to be an asylum. So we are, probably in the top 5 of least accessible museums that have ever been invented by mankind, unfortunately. The main obstacle for us is being on the base, although it's nice from a security perspective, I suppose. It makes it much harder for the public to get there. We are open to the public, and I do tell people everywhere, if you want to come and see us, at least normally when we're open, you can do that. It just takes a little bit of planning ahead of time. You basically have to call or email us ahead of time and set up a time to come in, because when you arrive here, you have to be vetted by the base security. They have to do a background check on all visitors before you can come in, and then you can come to the museum. So it's not necessarily difficult. It's not, you don't have to fill out a bunch of forms or anything. It's just that it takes a few days prior planning. So the downside is that, oh yeah.
So you don't just show up at the gate. You actually have to make an
Unfortunately,
appointment.
no. Yeah, all the casual tourists are in Newport over the summer. If they decide to just come on a whim, unfortunately, we can't accommodate that, and that's just nothing that's under our control. The base security is, they don't take the museum's needs into account. It's all about the rest of the base and the security requirements for the college and the base as a whole. So it's just something we have to live with. But just so you know, as you're planning to looking at this ahead of time. So I'm going to give you not the whole tour of the museum here, but maybe 15 minutes or so of just kind of some of the highlights of what we're about. So we're called the Naval War College Museum. We were founded in 1952. That's in this building that was the original building for the college. even though we have the name War College in our title, the museum really has been just kind of a general naval history museum for most of its life. Of course, we kind of focus as much as we can on local naval history. We try to focus on Narragansett Bay, both naval and maritime history, since there's so much of it going back so long in this particular part of New England. And then as much as we can about the college's specific contribution to that well. But most of our exhibits, we do kind of broadly cover a lot of topics in naval history, and we try to do kind of what we're best at, because what the college really studies is not the sort of like they look at naval history from the high level kind of strategic point of view, and in fact that's what they teach at the college, is kind of like high level naval strategy, the kind of complex thinking and decision making processes that senior officers have to be able to do in their jobs. So when you become a captain and an admiral, you're dealing with a much different set of problems than a very junior officer would. So that's what they're focused on, and that's what we try to focus on in the museum too, is kind of these broad developments in how thinking about naval strategy and policy has changed over the decades. And a lot of that begins in Newport. So when you come into our museum, this is kind of what you see right away here in the beginning. This one of the biggest models that we have in the collection of HMS Victory. And people are sort of surprised sometimes to see, why is there a British warship here greeting us at the entrance to this US naval history base? So we use that as kind of a tie-in just to talk about the fact that Narragansett Bay has seen, centuries of naval use, not just by the U.S. Navy, but even before the U.S. was independent. The British and French navies were here fighting over it during the Revolution, and warships from all over the world would stop in Newport. HMS Victory itself kind of has a tie-in to us, both because, oh yes, go ahead.
That's Admiral Nelson's flagship.
It is, you got it. That is him. And in fact, I know there's glare on the screen or on the case here, but if you look behind the ship, you see that painting behind it that shows Admiral Nelson going down in his finest moment there, taking a bullet.
Indeed, at the Battle of Trafalgar.
That's it. That's Trafalgar. So you probably can't see it on the label here, but we talk about the fact that at Trafalgar, even though it's not a U.S. naval battle, there were about 360 Americans present at the battle because they were serving on these ships, most of them probably unwillingly, but they were there. And 24 of them on Victory, in fact, and one of them, we think at least one of them was from Newport specifically. So we just kind of use this as a way to show that, especially in that period, even though ships were from a particular nation or flying a nation's flag, they had people from all over the world. And a lot of those sailors would have been recruited in ports like Newport. So we definitely start out kind of focusing on the colonial and revolutionary period. This ship in front of you here is HMS Rose, which is a ship that's kind of well known for being involved in Rhode Island affairs at the start of the American Revolution. It was one of these ships the British sent over to try and enforce customs duties when they were trying to crack down on all the smuggling that was going on in American ports kind of leading up to the Revolution. It rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in Newport and Providence, and they eventually it kind of leads, this confrontation with this ship leads to the creation of the Rhode Island State Navy in 1775. So, this is before independence has even been declared officially, that Rhode Island is organizing its own state navy to try and fight back against these kind of revenue collection vessels that the British were sending into the bay. The one behind it, that's sort of like a half model, is a sloop, the Providence, that was renamed Katy, and is one of the two ships that became these first ships in the Rhode Island State Navy. It was eventually brought into the Continental Navy as well. But they had a little bit of a battle out on the bay in 1775, where they fought one of these small boats that was one of the tenders serving HMS Rose. And that was one of these kind of very early confrontations between the colonists and the British. Next door to that, there's a couple kind of neat artifacts here that relate to some of these figures that are connected with Rhode Island naval history. So the name Abraham Whipple, I don't know if that rings a bell or has come up in class yet, but he's one of these early, he's a captain from Rhode Island, and he is kind of probably the most I guess, successful and well-known naval and merchant captain before the war, but naval officer during it, who comes out of Rhode Island. We have on loan from our headquarters in DC, they actually have a quadrant that he used. This is a device that you would use on a sailing ship to measure the angle of the sun above the horizon, so you can come up with an approximate position of where your ship is at sea. I really like this because it's, these tools, these kind of, today, GPS or instruments are very functional. Obviously, there's not very much artistic about them, but back in those days, they often, along with these tools, they would sometimes do these nice engravings, and you see this nice ivory inlay that's in here with his name engraved on it. It has the date November 1776 when he bought it from this instrument maker in Newport. So there's kind of a nice mix of form and function in some of these old tools that you don't really see anymore. So we have that on display as well here too. So Newport's kind of big claim to fame, I guess you will, during the Revolution is that it was occupied by the British. After the British left Boston, I think a lot of students of the Revolution and people who are kind of interested in reading know that they went to New York and made New York kind of their main base after that. But people sometimes forget that they also took over Newport at the same time. So they had kind of two major bases in the colonies after being chased out of Boston, and Newport was one of those. So this case that you're seeing here, we have a collection of artifacts that are from two British ships that were in Narragansett Bay from 1776 till about 1779 as part of the British occupying fleet. These two British frigates called the Cerberus and Orpheus were both sunk on purpose. They were scuttled when the French Navy arrives in 1778. Once the French enter on the side of the colonists, they send their own navy over to Narragansett Bay, and the two fleets almost have a big battle that almost would have resulted in probably one fleet or the other being chased off, and may have caused the Revolution to end sooner than it would have normally. But all of these things are things that almost happened but didn't, because a storm actually blew in and chased both fleets away. So they never had this big confrontation. But when the French arrive, oh yeah, do you have another question?
So many, I mean, at least until the advent of modern ships, storms have changed the path of so many maritime incidents.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think there are like so many times you read about, either weather or fog or wind, causing where two ships almost sight each other, and they came this close to to having a serious confrontation, but they don't because of just dumb luck, things like that. So that was definitely the case with this naval battle that precedes a land battle, the Battle of Rhode Island. But when the French do arrive, the British kind of see that they're going to be stuck in their fleet is in the bay, and they don't want to be trapped in the bay with no way out. So once they realize that they're going to have to evacuate Newport, they scuttled their ships. And these artifacts that you see here are remnants or are artifacts that were brought up from these wreck sites. We didn't do the diving to retrieve these. I wish we would have. That would have been great to be able for us to do. But the state of Rhode Island has its own historical enterprise who specializes in doing underwater archaeology. So they recovered these artifacts, and we have them on loan from the state of Rhode Island. But it's great to be able to have these actual guns and pieces of ammunition and just blocks and tackles and sheaves that were actually used on sailing ships from that time. And so you can see there are this small bow gun here that one of the smaller guns that would have been on those frigates, and various types of ammunition they had. But that's a nice kind of representation of the British Navy's role in the Revolution. We do talk a little bit about getting to the end of the Revolution piece here. Newport itself is the site of a battle that I think a lot of people are not too familiar with, just because it's not preserved. There's no visitors center that you can go to. There's very little in the way of signage around, but the Battle of Rhode Island is actually Newport's, kind of right in Newport's backyard here. It was this very large land battle. It was larger than any other battle in New England, actually, but larger than Bunker Hill, larger than Lexington and Concord, where the Americans were trying to kick the British out of Newport forcefully and take the town back. And it would have been the first time that they had cooperated with the French if the French Navy had been able to get into the bay and land their army as well. But as I was talking about, this storm that kind of foiled those plans and they weren't able to get in. So they were not able to cooperate as they thought they would have been able to. And that kind of left the Americans a little bit too weak to really attack the British army that was in Newport. But nevertheless, they did have this pretty large battle that's kind of in present day Middletown. If you've been down this way, you know some of the geography here. It's kind of well known for some of the local units that were in this battle. You see here the graphics are showing kind of where it took place, and the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, that was a regiment of mostly freed African Americans who fought in this battle, formerly enslaved men who had been able to escape and then enlisted in the army. So they fought here as well. We cover all of that, a little bit of that, and then talk about Newport's role in the end of the war as well. The whole sequence of events that ended with the surrender in Yorktown really begins in Newport, because a large part of that army that was at Yorktown actually marched all the way down there from Newport, if you can believe that. Some of them were lucky enough to be able to sail, but a lot of them had to hoof it. And then the fleet, the French fleet that contributes to that victory, also sailed from Newport. So Newport itself has a pretty key role in that aspect of the war as well. So a couple of the other kind of neat artifacts that we have on display. If you're familiar with the Perry family, Matthew Perry and his brother Oliver Hazard Perry, who both are these pretty well-known American naval officers. This is Matthew Perry's uniform hat, his cocked hat that he used sometime between the 1820s and 1830s when he was serving on the African squadron. The Perry family, both of them are actually buried in Newport now. So they were from Rhode Island and then are kind of buried in the cemetery there local to us. So a lot of people who were interested in their story come to see some of these things. A couple of my personal favorites in the collection, I kind of like these snuff boxes that we have that are these kind of commemorative pieces from the War of 1812. So the one on the left that you see, you may not be able to read all of that, but these are both snuff boxes that have these lithographed prints on them. The one on the left is showing a scene from the battle between the Macedonian and the United States, these two frigates, one of these early victories in the War of 1812. And then the one on the right is from the Battle of Lake Erie, where Oliver Hazard Perry makes his name for himself. So the War of 1812 really saw a lot of these kind of, mementos, I guess you would say, for lack of a better word. I didn't show it, but behind this in the case, we have, this was a period where a lot of people loved to collect pieces of wood from these famous ships and turn them into canes or things like that. Oh, yep. Do you have another question?
There was a battle at Lake Erie?
There was, yeah. People used to fight over the Great Lakes. In the War of 1812, the lakes battles really, most people, historians agree, were kind of more important to the outcome of the war than the well-known victories out on the ocean involving the frigates like Constitution. Sorry, Carl. I know you probably agree with me, but
they're terribly important trade routes. Still are today.
Yes.
It's one of the fascinating aspects about it, about that war, right, Rob, is that that was strategically the center of the action. And yet that ties back to why souvenirs were being made of these other battles. And we'll be talking more in the class later on, guys, about the nature of this kind of commemoration of these ships and battles, and how significant, how popular they were because of how significant these victories were to sort of American morale and that sense of nationhood. So strategically, the war was won on the Great Lakes, but the hearts were won at sea.
Yeah.
Although you also have at least a replica of Perry's flag from the Battle of Lake Erie with the ringing.
We do, yeah. The original, if you ever go down to Annapolis and go to the Naval Academy Museum, they've got the original flag down there. We have a replica of it up here as well.
And does anyone other than Rob or Carl know what the flag says?
Don't give up the ship. Ring a bell to everybody.
Don't give up the ship.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Which we have to say, after he said that, they promptly then gave up the ship. But they tried for a little while.
Indeed.
But these battles out on the Great Lakes. The thing that we kind of learned from the Revolution, the War of 1812, is that Americans just love to try to invade Canada. And you know what? We're really bad at it. We've never succeeded, but we keep trying, or that we kept trying in these wars.
Unless we go wearing black and gold.
That's right.
Why would
Unless
anyone
it's
try
hockey,
to fight
then
on
we
the
have a
Great
chance.
Lakes? They're horribly dangerous, and I don't even know how many ships have sunk in there. They say that Lake Superior is the lake that never gives up her dead.
Yeah.
Why would you want to fight in there?
Being from Michigan, I can tell you that's totally true. It is. They are, even though they're inland lakes. There's tons of.
They're
shipwrecks.
like oceans.
Yeah, I mean
And the storms.
And they're far up north, right? So it's not like you've got great weather to sail in. But
no.
Yeah, the reason they were important back then is that they were the best way for armies in the U.S. to get to Canada, and Americans were really viewed Canada. They were still part of the British Empire. They viewed Canada as kind of a dangerous. That was where London was way across the ocean. There was only so much they could do to us. But when Canada was right next door, that was seen as like the heart of British influence, and that they could still be a danger or a threat to American independence. So they kept really wanting to get Canada to join, in the Revolution, of course, they tried to get Canada to join in the independence movement and didn't succeed. But even in the War of 1812, they still thought if they could invade and take over, that they could kind of wipe out that last kind of seed of British influence in the colonies. So they never worked. All of these invasions failed, but they did prompt these kind of big battles. There was one on Lake Champlain too during the War of 1812. That was the other kind of major one that turned back a British invasion from Canada that probably had a good chance to be more successful than anything they'd even tried in the Revolution. So,
I know you want to move on, Rob, but one last note that I think might be of interest to students, and maybe you can speak to this coming from up there on the lakes. From a nautical archaeology standpoint, you mentioned the shipwrecks on the lakes, and certainly the battles that occurred at sea had wrecks that went to the bottom too. But the ones out on the great oceans are all but lost. But the freshwater nature of the lakes and the relative calmness at the bottom have meant some pretty amazing wreck recovery, right, Rob?
Yeah, they have, and I wish that we had some of those artifacts in our museum, and sadly we don't. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the combination of not being in salt water, and then those incredibly cold temperatures. Even though they don't make for nice bathing at the beaches in the summertime, they're great for preserving shipwrecks. So yeah, they have pulled some really nice pieces. I'm trying to think. I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago now that they pulled, I think, a gun out of one of the small ships on Lake Ontario. I remember reading about it. I just don't remember off the top of my head which one, but our museum is run by a larger command within the Navy called Naval History and Heritage Command. In addition to running museums, they also run these underwater archaeology expeditions, and they've run quite a few to the Great Lakes to recover some of those lakes shipwreck artifacts as well. So it's good. If you're going to have a battle on a freezing cold lake, at least you have the possibility
preserve the evidence,
preserving it. Yeah, exactly. Preserve the scene of the crime.
Well, actually, we can jump ahead because in Pensacola there's a museum mainly devoted to naval aviation, and there they have planes that have been pulled out of Lake Michigan because there was a training center there, and so they would ditch planes in the lake.
Yeah, and not to get too far off on a side, that whole training on World War II on Lake Michigan gave rise to, I think, what is like my favorite obscure ship the Navy has ever run. Believe it or not, during World War II, the Navy operated a side wheel paddle wheel aircraft carrier on Lake Michigan. Yeah. It was like a normal looking aircraft carrier, but it didn't use screw propellers. It had a side wheel on it, a paddle wheel, and operated like one of those things you see going down like the Ohio River.
In like 1800s.
Didn't have a little calliope and playing music. But
That's
they used
insane.
it for training because that was a perfect place to train naval aviators, where they weren't going to be out on the ocean where they, could have accidentally wandered into a German U-boat or something. The
Right.
lakes were very safe to do training, so it was purely for training purposes. But yeah,
Wow.
it's one of my favorite obscure,
Wow.
weird kind of ships the Navy came up with.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Sorry for asking so many questions, sir.
No. This is all good. Like, interrupt at any point. This is all free form for me. So this is.
I don't know much about American maritime history. I've mostly studied European stuff. So.
Oh yeah, no, this is all good. Ask away by all means.
So if I have a barrage of questions, sorry in advance.
It's all good. This little piece here, I want to mention again the Naval Academy real quickly, just because our story at the War College actually comes out of the Academy. During the Civil War, the Academy, as I think we said, it's down in Maryland, but the Academy actually moved. They picked the entire thing up and sailed it on Carl's ship up here to Newport on the Constitution. The Constitution was the training ship for the Academy at that time, but they packed the entire thing up and sailed all the students, all the faculty and staff and the classroom equipment up here to Newport. The reason they did that being that they were afraid at the time Maryland was going to also secede and join the Confederacy, and they didn't want the Academy to suddenly be trapped behind enemy lines. So they brought the whole thing up here, and at that point, so if you were an officer in the Navy in the mid-1800s or anytime, right after the Civil War, in terms of your training, the Naval Academy was pretty much all that you got. You would go through there, it works like it does today. It was a college program. So you went there for your 4 or 5 years, got your degree. You sometimes had to wait after you graduated to actually get your commission. They didn't necessarily commission you right away, but that was certainly the goal for most people. But once you went through there, the Academy really trains you to be like we said earlier, kind of a junior officer. So you learned a lot of things about how ships work, how to sail, how to navigate, how to fire the guns on a ship, kind of the simple things. But for anybody who stayed in the Navy, if you rose to become, a captain or an admiral, you're not really concerned with the day-to-day operations of a ship. You've got to think about things like strategy and logistics and feeding an entire fleet and international relations, how to respond to a provocation or diffuse a situation. And those are things that, there isn't really time to cover all that at the Academy. There's only so much you can learn in your 4 years there. So the person who is identified as the founder of the Naval War College, Stephen B. Luce, he was with the Academy. He was a professor with the Academy during the Civil War. So he was here in Newport. And he realized that, although the training they got was good, he realized that the Navy really needed to expand what it did in terms of training its officers. And he eventually decided that really what they needed was another school. That once you graduated from the Academy, you went out to the fleet and you served for however long you did. At some point, you needed to come back in from sea and go back to school. It's not that different, I think, from what private companies, corporations do with kind of training their management. As you go throughout your career, you're almost always having to take ongoing classes and training to kind of learn new skills. And that's basically the idea that he had, was that the Navy needed to get in on that too. So that's in a nutshell why we're here. And that's how we grow out of the Naval Academy's experience. Some of those faculty that taught with the Academy who came to Newport during the Civil War looked around and thought, oh, Newport's actually a really great place to have not just a school, but a major naval installation, because there's this huge harbor, there's this huge port. The entire U.S. fleet at that time could fit in Narragansett Bay. So it was well protected. It was easy to get in and out of. And it was already an established port. So there were a lot of experienced sailors in the area who could, pass on their skills. So there was a lot to recommend it. So that's how the War College kind of grows out of the existing naval education structure. All right, so just a little bit about the rest of the museum here. That was kind of like the first introductory part. In addition to the college, we do talk about the other naval activities that are here in the Bay. And besides the War College, the other really kind of big important one is the Naval Torpedo Station. Newport being the place where the U.S. Navy, at least, really developed and experimented with and finally perfected torpedoes as a new type of technology to use on their ships. So these two here are the very first two types of torpedoes that the Navy ever ever developed. Only the one on the bottom was actually used. The one on top is called the fish torpedo. That was the very first one, just experimental, never used in a battle or never even actually went to sea on a deployment with a ship. But they just tested it here in Newport. And the one below it, the Howl torpedo, was one that was kind of developed and borrowed from an English design and modified a little bit. That one was used in the Spanish-American War, or at least it was present for the Spanish-American War. The Navy had a little bit of a disconnect between developing this technology, but then actually learning how to use it. They did put these torpedoes on these small, they were kind of almost like large speedboats. They were called torpedo boats that were built by the Herreshoff Company here in Narragansett Bay. They built them and they sent them down there to Cuba during the Spanish-American War. But they didn't really use them in the role that they had been intended for. They couldn't quite figure out how these little torpedo boats should operate with the rest of the fleet. So that kind of gets into the college's role with, I said, developing and teaching bits about naval strategy. But it is kind of a neat thing for us to have these torpedoes here. They don't look that different from, what you would think of, I think, as a torpedo today. They obviously look a little bit more steampunkish or Jules Verne type, but they basically work the same way. Aim it at a ship and hope that it hits it. So as the years have gone by, the Torpedo Station just developed more in terms of how to solve all those problems, in terms of actually getting them to hit something, and then if they do, actually getting them to explode. And that was something that gave the Navy a whole lot of trouble in World War II, especially. You can't see it in this shot, but behind this, we have an example of a World War II torpedo. The Torpedo Station became kind of infamous, not famous, but infamous, unfortunately, during World War II, as making torpedoes that just didn't work. Either they ran in circles, they wouldn't go straight, or when they hit something, they didn't explode, and would often give away the position of the submarine or the ship that had fired it. So it was just bad news all around, and it took them several years to really figure out. There were multiple problems going on with the engineering and the design of these things that were causing all those issues. So they finally figured them out. By about 1943, they had finally got most of those issues solved, but it was a difficult teething process, and everybody in Newport kind of, or the people at the Torpedo Station kind of denied that they had anything to do with it. Said, no, we're building them right. It's, all those submarine captains out there, they're just, it's operator error. They're not firing these things correctly. And then the submarine captains would say, no, we're doing everything right. We're putting these right on target, and they're just not working. So it's a bit of a scuffle there between the people out on the ocean actually using these and the people back here at Newport building them. But eventually they got them all worked out. Yeah.
Was it a fault with the actual shaping of the torpedo, or was it something with the guiding on the ships, or what was the problem?
It's all of the above, basically. Yeah, there were a couple problems. The two most significant ones were these torpedoes were aimed using a gyroscope. So you had this kind of very delicate, finicky gyroscope on the inside of that metal tube that actually guided it. They eventually figured out that there were problems with air leaking into that compartment and throwing off the gyroscope. So unfortunately, in the worst case scenario, there are a couple examples of a submarine that was submerged firing a torpedo, and instead of running straight, it actually ran around in a circle and came back and hit the submarine that had fired it and sank it. So,
my good grief.
Not that there's any good way to die in a war, but of all the ways, that seems like a particularly bad.
Going down in a submarine.
Getting hit by your own weapon
is one of the most horrifying ways to die on the ocean.
Yeah.
Now so it's amazing that this is about 50 years from these to the 1940s. And I'm wondering, the Germans and the Japanese, did they have similar issues with their torpedoes, or was it a different technology?
Did, yeah. The only, consolation we can take is that, the U.S. Navy wasn't the only one to deal with these. Pretty much all the naval powers, including Germany and Japan, had these same problems. Especially with Japan, though, their advantage was that they worked out all those problems before the war. They spent a lot of time in the 1930s doing these tests and found some of these same things, and they ended up kind of famously modifying their torpedoes for the attack on Pearl Harbor that would let them run in very shallow water. The Germans had pretty much the same experience we did in the early war. Their U-boats,
they're infamous to this day.
And they would fire a spread of 3 or 4 torpedoes, hoping that maybe one of them would hit, or one of them would detonate if it did hit. So they had the same problems we did. They also worked them out, kind of on the spot as fast as they could. But it's just, it was a technology that was still relatively new. And anytime you're dealing with something new, especially in a war where everybody is stressed out, everybody is like, we got to fix this now. It's hard to work under those conditions. So
it's probably worth pointing out, Rob, because our class is focusing on the USS Constitution, that Robert Fulton wrote a book called Torpedo Warfare, published in 1811, saying that this is actually the warfare of the future. And he did get the Navy to run tests, and the Navy figured out how to counter the torpedo that Fulton was proposing. So this isn't a new thing in the 20th century. They've been working on something like this for a long time, from the period we're talking about, from Carl and my period.
Before, we'd say this is sort of the advent of what the Navy called automotive torpedoes. And before this, they had a full century's worth of dealing with spar torpedoes, these stationary things that you basically tied a bunch of explosive to the end of a pole and put it on your boat and went out and rammed another ship with it. But they did have some experiments even during the Civil War with some kind of exotic things like rocket-powered torpedoes. Basically, we have some records of designs they experimented with where they were trying to do this, just in the early 1800s. Didn't quite figure it out, but they got pretty close. And a lot of it's all kind of evolutionary technology. But it's a fascinating story in its own right.
And speaking of great naval phrases, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, was what Farragut said in Mobile.
Or at least is remembered to have said it.
Thank you.
Although, like so many of these famous phrases, they probably didn't really actually say that, but something like it, pretty close.
That's completely and utterly ridiculous. Just saying. Damn a torpedo.
Those torpedoes, he's referring actually to mines, not these.
They were mines, they were stationed.
What we call mines today is what they called torpedoes in the Civil War. So,
okay.
But, it's another one of those kind of confusing things with language and all. So on our second floor, that wall was kind of like the first floor of our museum. We're, I should have said in the beginning, we're a relatively small museum. It's 2 floors of exhibits. We've got about 14,000 objects in our collection, which may sound like a lot, but by museum standards, that puts us in kind of the small museum category. And normally there's 6 of us on staff, and there's just 5 right now. We're getting ready to hire an educator, so hopefully we'll be back up to full strength. But so that was kind of the whole first floor. On the second floor, we go a little bit into Newport's role as a training base. Newport today is known kind of unofficially in the Navy as the campus of the Navy, just because of all the schools that are here. The Naval War College is the most well-known one, but in addition to that, there are schools for other groups and people in the Navy, for enlisted sailors, for new officers. The Navy's OCS program, Officer Candidate School, is here as well. So if you don't go through the Academy or ROTC, you can also go through OCS to be an officer. So that's in Newport. So there's a lot of training schools, and all of that kind of comes out of going back again to the founder of the college, Stephen B. Luce. At the same time he was pushing for the War College to be established, he was also pushing really hard for improvements to the way that just normal enlisted sailors were trained. And it was kind of the same deal for them. They didn't really have any formal training they went through. They didn't have boot camp back in the 1800s. If you wanted to join the Navy, you pretty much just went and signed up and joined, and they threw you on a ship and paired you up with maybe one of the older sailors and learn from him, and you learned on the job. And that doesn't mean that didn't work. Certainly, the Navy did very well for itself in the 1800s and up into World War But, you know, a lot of people felt like, yeah, we could probably do better if we had a more formalized system of onshore training. And so Newport is where, at least for the Navy, the idea of basic training is implemented for the first time. So they set up this school here, the apprentice training program, where they bring kids as young as 14 years old actually could come in and join this program and just learn a lot of skills about sailing and navigation and working on ships. It was something that was just really important at the end of the 1800s when the Navy was getting away from its sailing ship routes and getting into, where you had to have a lot more knowledge about machinery, with ships being powered by steam engines and having to work, complex pieces of equipment and gunnery. It used to be, you could take someone off the street and teach them to at least be a functional crew member on a sailing ship without too much trouble. But once it gets more technical and complex, you need more and more training beforehand before you actually put somebody on a ship. So that's the thinking behind why Newport becomes this kind of place. We just want to show this one little display we have in the corner here with our, I guess you could call it our biggest claim to fame in World War I. Newport had this kind of weird encounter with a German submarine in World War I, and this is in October of 1916. Before the U.S. was in the war, we were still neutral at that point, but Newport got a visit from, you see the model of the ship down there, the U53. It's this German U-boat that just kind of showed up in Narragansett Bay one morning, unannounced. Nobody knew that it was coming. And the U-boat, the captain of the U-boat got on the radio and asked permission to come into Newport and dock. And since the U.S. was still neutral at that point, we were actually required to let them do that. To not allow them to do that would have basically been a provocation for war. And in 1916, they were still trying to stay out of it. So they allowed this U-boat to come in. You can see there's a photo here of the crew and everything. And the artifact that's mounted above the photo there is a World War I U-boat badge from a German Navy uniform. So that's kind of what they would have been wearing on there. But they had come across the Atlantic from Germany. Even in World War I, Germany had U-boats that could make that trip, not submerged. Now, they were running on the surface almost all the time. Submarines at this period are not like what we think of submarines now, where they go underwater and you don't see them again for 6 months. They couldn't do that in 1916. They were basically small surface craft that had the ability to submerge for short periods of time. So, but they did make it across the ocean, which is still a pretty impressive feat for a small ship like that at that time. So they show up in Newport, and the captain actually gets on shore and meets the president of the Naval War College. And everybody here in Newport is kind of not sure what to do. This is the war is going on. The U.S. isn't in it yet, but they know Germany is at war with Great Britain and France, and they don't want to do anything to provoke an incident here. So they let them kind of come on land. And the captain of the ship, of the U-boat, his name is Hans Rose. He's ends up being kind of a famous German naval officer. He pretty much tells the Americans in Newport that he just wants to come on. They want to get out, stretch their legs, get some fresh air, maybe send some letters. They just want to stay for a few hours to kind of rest and refuel if they can, which we were also, required to let them do that if they wanted to as a neutral country. So on the surface, it was all, a friendly visit. They actually invited some of the naval officers at the base to come on and take a tour of the U-boat. So they showed them the U-boat. Everything was polished, spick and span, spit polished, fittings, nice, clean uniforms. Everybody had tried to take a bath so they didn't stink from crossing the Atlantic for 6 weeks. But so, it was all very goodwill on at least the surface of it. So the next day, when they're allowed to stay for 24 hours and then they leave, they actually leave the evening that they show up. So they didn't even stay the full 24 hours. But Hans Rose, thanks them for their hospitality and says, we'll be on our way now. So he takes the U-boat out past Martha's Vineyard, and he parks himself kind of in the middle of the main shipping lane that's running up the East Coast, going up to Canada, and he starts sinking merchant ships that are carrying supplies to the war in Europe. And the key is that he's not sinking American ships. He's only sinking merchant ships that are flagged that are carrying the flags of powers involved in the war. So British and French, and any ship that's carrying supplies for them is considered fair game. So the whole point of this is that really what they were trying to do was send a message to the US. Keep in mind again that, you know, we're neutral, but there's, you know, the US is starting to tilt more towards getting involved. They were really trying to send a message of saying, if you do join the war, you know, look what we can do. This is just one U-boat, and it sank 5 ships out here in the Atlantic. And if that's what one U-boat can do, imagine what a whole fleet of them could do, parked off of every major American seaport on the East Coast. So it was very much kind of one of these diplomatic kind of missions as a way to kind of try to keep the U.S. out of the war. So that's kind of Newport's claim to fame during World War I. So we finish up here with this. This exhibit is the most recent one we have. It's was put up in 2017 for the centennial of American involvement in World War I, where we just talk a little bit about what the U.S. Navy did in the war. I think with World War I, you know, I think if you read about it, you sort of think more about the Army's side of it. You know, with trench warfare and you know, mustard gas and all these horrible things that went on land. But the naval side of it is maybe not as well known, at least to the general public. So we try to talk here about, you know, what the Navy's contribution was. And the biggest one being that the Navy, you know, basically allowed the Army to get there and transported and escorted the Army's transport ships across the ocean so they could arrive in France to take part in the fighting. If you come through this exhibit, this bridge that you see there in the front is actually connecting on the floor there. There's a map of the US and the Europe. So to drive the home point, you literally walk across a bridge from the US to Europe to show how the Navy was the bridge to get the troops there to the fighting. Once they were there, the Navy certainly did its part in one squadron of American battleships, joined the Royal Navy actually, and patrolled in the North Sea, trying to keep the German Navy at bay so they wouldn't break out into the Atlantic Ocean. And they did that partly by, you see here a model of a mine. They sold a very large belt of mines across the North Sea to keep German U-boats and surface ships bottled up and trapped in the North Sea. So they pretty involved in mine laying. The Marines, of course, make their appearance in the fighting and kind of start to build the legend of the Marine Corps, where they become not the sort of throwaway branch of the service that they were before that, or at least the one that nobody quite knew what to do with, and kind of become, you know, the much more elite branch that we think of them today. And we cover a little bit of their story here as well. And it all ends then with kind of what the Navy does with that experience. So I'll go back here in the beginning. This guy who is Admiral William, he was an admiral, then William Sims, was the president of the Naval War College in 1917. And he actually took a break from being the president to go over and run the naval, at least the US naval effort in the war. So he gets a lot of experience at, this was kind of the first time that the Navy had to cooperate with allies in a large scale naval endeavor. And he learned a lot from doing that. And he kind of saw the way that the British did things. And he realized that the War College had to change a lot of what it taught based on, you know, these good lessons that they learned during the war. One of the ways that he wanted to do that was by doing a lot more with wargaming. The college had already implemented wargaming as part of its curriculum going back to the 1880s. Wargaming itself, you know, if you think of like pushing around little model ships or model soldiers on the floor, that was something that the U.S. learned largely from Germany. They were the ones who really pioneered the use of this in the 1800s. But the War College, the Naval War College specifically, becomes not just for the Navy, but for the whole U.S. military, kind of the premier institution where they use wargaming as a way to train officers in a, you know, somewhat stressful environment where, you know, they try to make it realistic in terms of putting pressure on you to have to make decisions, make your move, decide what you're going to do, but obviously where the consequences of failure are much less than when you're actually learning on the job during a war. So in the early days, you can kind of see from those photographs in the back, they did actually use little model ships, and they had a big room that you see there on the left. It's almost like a basketball court sized room that had a checkerboard pattern, and that's what you see in the foreground here, where they would set up these battles, and you'd have kind of, I always think would be a funny scene of seeing, these like captains and admirals, pretty senior people in the Navy, down on their hands and knees, pushing little toy ships around, I got you, sank your battleship. Get into arguments about who won or not. But that was all part of the way that they tried to give them some taste of what, an admiral's job was in an actual battle. And you'd have limits, you'd only have like maybe a minute to decide what you wanted to do. You had to write down your order on a piece of paper, and if they assumed you might not be able to communicate directly with everybody, in another ship, because radios at that time were unreliable. So you may have to use things like signal flags or written messages, and if those messages weren't clear, then the other people on your team may not do exactly what you intended for them to do. So that was all part of this learning process they tried to give people an experience of. So the last thing I want to show you is what we do at the museum here to try and give people a little taste of what that was. So these days in the lockdown, when everybody's at home and school and work, we're all probably playing games, computer games, video games in one sense or another. When people talk to us or talk to me about wargaming at the college, it's one of our probably topics that gets the most interest. People are fascinated to kind of learn about, what does a game at the Naval War College look like? What, can we see one? Can we actually watch one as they play? And sadly, the answer is no, you can't. None of those games are open to the public, as you can imagine. If they end up revealing, that American aircraft carriers have this horrible weakness that any Navy can exploit, then that's not something you want the public to be aware of. So they're all restricted. I can't, and I myself haven't even seen one. None of us at the museum have a security clearance to go watch. So I'm not keeping from you anything that I've seen myself. I've never seen one either. But what we can do is use commercially available games, board games or computer games, and computer games kind of work best for our objectives for this right now, to use a computer game like this to talk about things like, battles in the Age of Sail, how they worked, but then also to kind of tie it into gaming at the college, and how the Naval War College might use a game similar to this to sort of, teach and what lessons it might try to teach, and talk about the fact that even today, so you were asking, Rachel, about the Battle of Trafalgar. In some classes at the college, they still, at the War College, they teach things about the Battle of Trafalgar today. Obviously, they're not looking at it in terms of, trying to extract tactical lessons. The navies don't fight the way like they did at Trafalgar in the Age of Sailing ships, but you can take lessons in terms of looking at the senior commanders on present, and what were the decisions that they made? What information did they have available to them? What did they decide to do? Was that the correct decision or not? How did they operate under pressure? How did they deal with stress, with all the noise and chaos around them? Those things, are still valuable teaching tools to officers today, even if the tactics and technology have changed. So that's why they still look at battles from different time periods. So what I'm going to do, this is the last bit here. This is about a 2-minute clip I want to play you. So we've done 2 of these programs so far. We're about ready to do the third in a week from today. We're going to do a World War II game, but this one was one that we ran, what was it, back in June, I believe, of last summer. We're using a game called Total War Empire. I don't know if any of you have it or familiar with it, but it has a pretty good naval battle module in it that we use to play out a battle from the American Revolution, the Battle of Cape Henry. This was a battle in 1781 that was a kind of one of the battles leading up to the end phase and the surrender at Yorktown. But it was this small encounter between a British squadron and a French squadron off of Cape Henry down in Virginia, near the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. So what we did was we at the War College Museum actually challenged another Navy museum to play against us in this. So we're part of this system of Navy museums. And we challenged the Hampton Roads Naval Museum, which is in the same system we are, to play against us here. And they accepted. So we're trying to go through and like challenge all the other Navy museums and either show how good we are at wargaming or erase the evidence if we lose. So we don't want to be embarrassed. But so we ran this, and we had a historian from the college online with us to kind of talk about, just talk about what was happening in the battle, talk about, whether it was, how well it matched up with the actual historical battle, if it didn't, what we did differently, and just use it as a teaching tool. So you'll hear me talking here, and what this is right when the battle is kind of getting underway. Me and the director of the Naval College Museum are on the French team. The British team is also composed of 2 staff members. They're the ones down at Hampton Roads. They're playing against us. So you'll hear us talking a little bit about it, and this is kind of right at the critical point where we get into the action. So I'll go ahead and play this for you. Whoops, I've clicked off it. Sorry, let me go back. Okay. And just let me, can you all hear the audio from it? Is that coming through? Oh, it's not? Okay. Let's see if I can make sure that it's sharing the audio from, let's see. Well, not sure. May not.
A few shots going back and forth. Mostly these ships do usually typically have 2 or 3 guns mounted in the bow and the stern, the bow chasers and stern chasers as they called them. So there's a few of those, but it looks like now we're into broadside range, so you're seeing a full broadside go off here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to show everybody what's going on. So as the French, we've got our 2 columns coming along here, and we're basically looking at trying to catch this this first grouping of 4 ships from the British in between our 2 lines and see if we can kind of gang up on them before that rear squadron can help them out.
Yeah, Elijah, can you close that gap?
Ryan. Speaking of that, it looks like I have a good chance to kind of cut through the British line right here, which I'm going to go ahead and take that opportunity. I may even come to a stop right here and see if I can get off a few good broadsides.
And I'm doing my best not to get my T crossed by the lead ship, so working on my broadsides.
Looks like we've got 1 ship. Let's see. This is the 2nd British ship in the line that's in trouble with their sails, so he's going to be a little less maneuverable than he might normally be. Ryan, I'm basically paralleling you. I'm coming down the British line here, so we're going to see if we can sandwich these 2 British ships between the 2 of us and pummel on them.
All right, so that's it. Yeah, the excuse me. So that we ran this game for about an hour. We streamed it live to our Facebook page so that people could watch, and it was a lot of fun. We brought as much educational content into it too. I was kind of aware of the fact that I didn't want this to be, a bunch of government employees sitting around playing computer games and that it just looked like we were goofing off and having a good time. But the fact is, that this is, we at the museum have to figure out ways to, teach and reach people in new and interesting ways, especially now when everybody's at home. And, a lot of people enjoy, there's such a huge audience for people who want to watch computer games online, not even play them, but watch. So we're trying to tap into that. but also use it to just explain, again, kind of, you didn't hear it here, but the historian that I mentioned had a lot of great commentary at the end of this game about the tactics and the technology and who these sailors were and what happened here. So even though at this point in the game, it looked good for the French, for me and Ryan, our director, it turned out to be a very hard scenario for us to win. So we did end up losing this one in the end, but it started out great for us. We like punched through the line right here and kind of isolated a bunch of British ships. But this was just a good way for us to show this visually and give people a good time watching the game and use that as kind of a lead in to talking about the War College's role in a larger sense. So
you said next Friday there you're doing World War II one?
We are, and actually I misspoke. It's Thursday. It's next Thursday, the 18th. I created there's an event for it on our Facebook page. So if you look for the Naval War College Museum Facebook, and I can email it to you if you want. But look for the event on our museum page, and you'll see it. We'll be using a different game here. It's more of a traditional hex map to move in it. So like a larger scale. It's not a tactical battle like this. It's kind of a strategic game, but it's the same idea. We'll be doing something similar. So
did you say World War II, Rob?
It is, yeah. It's going to be it's a scenario that's kind of around the very end of the Guadalcanal campaign. So this is in like February of 1943, where the Japanese are kind of trying to evacuate their last few units that are on the island and get them off to fight another day. And historically, the U.S. Navy didn't intervene there. The Navy was held back because they kind of misread some intelligence signals coming in. But the game that we're going to play kind of is a what if scenario in terms of postulating what would have happened if the navies on both sides had actually played a more active role than they did in reality. So in addition to the part on land, there will be land units in this game too that move around and do pretty much historically what they did. There will also be this naval battle going on probably at the same time that is much more of a hypothetical that didn't actually happen but could have. So
and did you say you're using an off-the-shelf game for this?
We are, yeah. We're using a game called Order of Battle. It's on Steam if you look for it. But I've been looking around for games that for me, it's trying to find a game that serves our purposes, and that a real-time game like Total War here is okay, but it sort of puts the pressure on. Things are happening. You can't pause and stop, and you can pause it, but it's not great if you do, to kind of take a 10-minute talk about and showing off some artifact in our collection that relates to this, which we did here. But it's easier to do that with a turn-based game where you can, you're not doing something in real time. So I was looking for that, and then the scale of it too. The tactical games like this are fun. I mean, it's awesome to see, a naval battle represented here. But again, for the college, because what we deal with is operations and strategy, really trying to get a strategic level game is really more useful for my purposes, at least. Right. So this game, Order of Battle, I think does that pretty well. Yeah.
Who's your adversary next week?
So we are going for the inter-service rivalry approach this time. We are challenging the National Museum of the U.S. Army to fight this. So it's going to be an Army-Navy game.
Wow.
So it's the one of the guys who is playing with us actually was in this game that I just played the clip from. He used to work at Hampton Roads, and then he left there. He took a new job at the Army Museum. So we of course gave him tons of crap for leaving the Navy to go to the Army, but now we're gonna actually make it the true Army Navy thing. And it's too bad this isn't happening around the Army Navy game in December. But, we'll take it. We'll do it now and see how it goes. It should be fun.
Yeah.
Are these games? Do you think they're fairly? Well, obviously, if you display them to the public, do you think these are pretty good representations of historical battle tactics?
Yeah, that's part of the fun of a program like this is kind of talking about that and debating, what is realistic and what isn't. I don't have a simple answer for it. I would say some parts of it are, and other parts aren't. I think the speed at which the ships move, the tactics that set you up for success, trying to get out in front of the ship and cross in front of them, It does show that pretty well.
Mm.
The ranges of the guns, you have to get pretty close to cause a lot of damage. That's pretty realistic.
Mm.
Some parts of it, I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this in the game, is the fact that we were talking on Discord with each other. We could all talk to each other. The commanders in the Age of Sail would have given their right arm, and some literally did, to be able to talk to each other in real time and have this nice, we sort of have this God's eye view of the field where you can see the exact position of every ship and know their sail states and where they're going. We have so much more information at our hands than they did, and they were, I think if any of us were actually put in that position, we would be appalled at the kind of life and death decisions you had to make on almost no information, just on a gut feeling or based on whatever experience you had. But so that part of it, is not as realistic. But
we've been looking at the Constitution Museum. We've been talking with the developers of a couple of these kinds of games to look at creating something for us, because they're creating great visuals. But we've been looking at trying to adapt some of the software for educational purposes. And one of the fascinating things as these games are developed for the public market is that even the most devout historical game designer finds themselves being forced to sort of speed up the action on Age of Sail sailing ship games, because things did sort of evolve so slowly, and we're not happening anywhere near as quickly and rapidly, either in terms of vessel maneuvering or sort of the evolution of battle as you see in some of the kind of point and shoot games like this. But that in itself is sort of part of the fascinating element of it, I think. So
it is, I know we've discussed before about like the next game we use. I know that if we played World of Warships and we challenged, the National Marine Corps Museum or the National Museum of the U.S. Navy to a game of World of Warships, we'd probably have a huge audience of people wanting to see that.
Right.
And it would be fun. But, what's basically a first-person shooter kind of a game, it doesn't really serve the educational purpose of what we want to. I mean, you can use it as a vehicle to talk about what's realistic and what isn't, but if we really want to talk more about, again, the lessons that the college tries to teach, you can't really do that with a shooter type of or arcade type of game. It really needs to be something a little more detailed. But that's the problem any game, computer or board faces is, that balance between playability and realism. And you can make a game that's 100% realistic or close to it on the Age of Sail. But as Carl says, it wouldn't be very fun to play because it'd take you 6 to 8 hours or more to play.
Yeah, it's fun to play.
You wouldn't have any idea what was going on most of the time. So
if you're not a tourist walking through a museum, it can be fun to play if you want to spend 3 days doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's
Government
always
employees spending
that delicate balance that any game has. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I think I'll turn it over here and wrap up my part of it.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much. Are there questions for Mr. Doan?
Hey, Carl, I know we had talked about doing a program together with Wargaming, and I think just hearing you talk about it more, we should get back in touch on that, because I know that would be a great fun thing for both of us to do.
Yeah, I actually have reached out to some of those computer programmers who are doing some of those more gorgeous looking, but not necessarily historically accurate games, and adapting their marketable game to something that's more educationally based. Yeah. Hey, Rob, you mentioned a couple of different things in terms of the school serving as a training ground for young people coming into the Navy at the time later on, and then continuing today. So the Naval War College is situated on what it was a fairly active naval base down there in Newport. That is a little bit less so today, right? In terms of what it had been, say, during World War II and going into the Cold War. But you guys are still seeing a lot of people down there. As the museum, you may not have access to the public, easy access to the public, especially right now, but there's still a large amount of training going on down there even today, right?
There is, yeah. At any given time, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 11,000 people on the base. Most of those being students who are coming here for these training. And when I say they're coming for training, most of the schools on the base, like the one that you see, Carl, I think the Senior Enlisted Academy that sends their students up to do the SAIL training program on Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are usually a matter of, anywhere from, 6 to 8 weeks to maybe a few months at most. The War College is kind of an outlier in that it's a whole year program. Most of the other ones are not that long. Some of the other big ones are the Surface Warfare Officers School. So in the Navy, you have different kind of career paths you can follow, either being on submarines, being a pilot, an aviator. Everybody who's on a surface ship, basically like a destroyer or something, has their specialized school in Newport. So they come through for that. The Naval Academy actually does have a kind of a presence, and it's the Naval Academy Prep School is at Newport. So if you had applied to the Academy and maybe were very, very close to meeting all the requirements, but fell just short, maybe in a couple classes, sometimes the Academy will offer you what they call a conditional appointment, where they basically promise to take you in the next year's class, but they want you to do 1 year at the Naval Academy Prep School, just to kind of bring up that one grade or that one class, just to show and prove to them that you can handle the academic side of it, and then they'll let you in. So that's in Newport as well. But yeah, Newport was, there were actually ships. It was an actual fleet base in Newport up until the 1970s. And then one of these base realignments that happened in 1973, almost all of the ships left Newport. There's a small, it's a riverine squadron, like a little, if you think of those little, almost like motorboats that the Navy had in Vietnam on the rivers, that were like little speedboats. There's just a little squadron that is headquartered in Newport, but that's it now in terms of ships. So the ships have all left. Most of them either relocated to Newport or to Mayport in Florida. But at that point, that was where the Navy decided, yeah, we're not going to use Newport as a fleet base anymore, but it is going to be a training base. So it's they kind of, at the same time they took the ships away, they brought some of those schools back up to Newport that had went other places and just tried to consolidate almost all of the training. So after Newport, Great Lakes in Illinois is where the Navy's basic training is now. It's not at Newport anymore, but that's the other kind of big training base the Navy operates. So yeah, for Newport, it's pretty much, they usually say if you spend any length of time in the Navy, you're almost guaranteed to come through Newport at some point in your career for some school or some training.
Yeah. And then separately, I wanted to point out, you showed 2 early models of early British and American sailing ships bearing off against each other in sort of the very early years. And it's worth noting, I think, especially since, if you're going to come see USS Constitution, still an original ship afloat alongside, that while neither of those other ships still exist, replicas of both of them were built in the 1970s and are still sort of sailing. And one of them, the replica of the HMS Rose, and the other one of the Providence, were both based out of Newport and sailing in through the 70s, 80s, and into the 2000s, until one of them was converted over to make the film Master and Commander, and is now in San Diego.
Yeah.
So those historic ships are, in fact, like Constitution, similar to Constitution, though certainly smaller, are still sailing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any further questions for Rob? I mean, I know we'd be happy talking to you all day about the War College. Any other questions for him? Okay. Well, this has been great. So thank you for joining us. And I know everyone looks forward to seeing the Naval War College Museum, and I'll send a link to your Facebook page so people want to.
I think one more
Oh,
question.
Trevor, do you have a question?
Yeah, just one. I know that there's a lot of different bases scattered around Newport Bay, or not sure what it's called, but like I know that there are a few there that are kind of older. Did they have like a connection to the base and the college?
Yeah, there used to be more, definitely. The other kind of the major one that's across on the other side of the bay from us is Quonset Point. Its claim to fame is it's where the Seabees, the Navy's engineers, came into being, and they were trained there during World War II. There is still a very small, it used to be actually a very big naval air station there. And during the Cold War, they had aircraft carriers that were stationed at Quonset Point, and some of the anti-submarine patrol aircraft that hunted Soviet submarines in the North Atlantic flew out of Quonset Point. So all of that, yeah, it's gone today. There's still a very small, I think, Rhode Island Air National Guard presence. Every once in a while we get buzzed by C-130s flying out of Quonset Point, but it's pretty small. But yeah, there used to be more naval installations kind of all around the bay, and a lot of that grew out of the need to defend the bay, and kind of the forts and sea coast installations that were built to guard the entrances to the bay when they were trying to, in the kind of the progression of defenses of naval posts, when they were building forts in the 1800s, and they built a lot of these around the entrances. There are kind of three main entrances to Narragansett Bay where you would have found either forts or little small gun emplacements along the way. Some of those grew to become kind of like almost little installations in their own right. But Quonset Point was, yeah, a big one. Another one that's associated with us is just a little bit north of Newport. It's in present-day Portsmouth, Rhode Island. At what was called the Melville Motor Torpedo Boat Training Facility. So if you know, like PT boats during World War II, which were actually these kind of huge speedboats that were meant to dash around, fire off torpedoes, and come back again. I think the main reason, if you have heard of it, most people would know of President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, trained there during World War II. He was on this famous PT boat, PT 109, that they made a movie, and there's all kinds of things written about it. So he trained in Melville with that. That isn't there anymore. The Navy doesn't use PT boats anymore, so that closed down after World War II. But yeah, that used to be up there as well. During World War II, they also trained, they had a small anti-aircraft training facility that was down pretty close to where like the mansions are in Newport. It's actually pretty bizarre. I can never, whenever I drive past it, I always look to see like, where did they have a base here? They actually had a very small school just for training people on these anti-aircraft artillery crews that was actually in Newport proper itself. So that's another big one. But yeah, at each of the kind of like narrow peninsulas or islands that are near the three entrances to the bay, there were little forts or gun batteries that were scattered around there protecting those as well. So there wasn't necessarily like one entity controlling all of those. They were all, some of them were Navy. It was the Army's job to run a lot of those too. Certainly they all tried to coordinate with each other. During World War II, they actually had, if you can believe it or not, an enormous underwater net that was stretched all the way across the entrance to Narragansett Bay to stop submarines from coming in, just stop U-boats from getting into the bay. As far as we know, none ever tried, but the net was there. So the Army and the Navy had to cooperate pretty closely, and actually tending to that net, keeping it in good shape, putting mines across the entrance to stop people. But then the Navy also had to go out there and patrol and actively look for these U-boats and not just kind of wait for them to come, but go out there and look for them. So yeah, it did take a lot of coordination. And as with all things Army and Navy, sometimes they worked well together, sometimes they didn't. So depends on if everybody involved is willing to be a good team player or not, I guess is what it comes down to.
Another great naval quote that someone might have said, I think it was Nimitz, when someone during the war referred to Japan as the enemy. He said, no, Japan is the adversary. The Army is the enemy.
Yeah. Anybody who comes out of the Naval Academy, I think, just has that burned into their DNA. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been fun, Rob. So thanks for joining us.
And thank you.
Good. And so the rest of us will take a short break, and then we will come back with Carl and me and more fun. So great. Thanks a lot for joining us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
I Carl, we have the same mug.
I love this shape. I actually have a couple of these. This one I got probably in 1978, something like that.
Cool mug, Professor.
And it turns out I've had it ever since. I've used it just about every day for my entire life. And it turns out that the people who made this one were the designers of this shape and design, and went on to create these molded ones later on. So this is the actual original one of these mug designs. There was a couple in California that made them and sold them at a handful of surf shops, and they were handmade. And I'm always terrified that it's going to break one day because it's been with me my whole life.
Wow.
But yeah, I only recently, thank God bless the internet, found out that whole history of it.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I had some students who went to Battleship Cove. It might have been a class assignment to go to a museum, and they went and they brought me this. So I've had this probably for 25 years now, but I use it as a pencil holder.
Well, and yours still has the rubber on the bottom, which mine has. On this one has lost off. But I can tell you from a shipboard life that these actually do work. They are quite spill-proof when you're rolling around, as long as the bottom doesn't slide.
Now you said they sold. No, go on,
It looks like one of those old-fashioned drinking jugs.
Yeah, it's designed to be flat on the bottom and then curve up, so it doesn't have a whole lot of spill area. And ones like Bob has actually have like a neoprene or rubber on the bottom, so that they don't slide over. But if you've got the rubber on the bottom so it's not sliding, this can literally sit on a ship, a table, and roll all over the place without spilling. And it's they're brilliant.
Yeah, they said they sold them in surf shops. So were these things surfers used, or they just crossover with boats?
No, I think they were. They came out of California. I was a little just surf nut on the beach in Florida, and I picked it up at my local surf shop.
Wow.
When I was a kid, and they were out of California, but they sold to surf shops. So
very good.
Started that way. There you go.
Where in Florida were you as a kid?
I was born up in Cape Canaveral, but I grew up in South Florida, Lauderdale, Palm Beach area.
Okay. I went to high school in Clearwater on the West Coast.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time in St. Pete, Clearwater.
Tampa. Yeah. One of my high school friends has actually been a high school teacher there since basically he grew up, went to college, and never left. So
yeah, I still have a lot of friends. Still have a lot of friends there too. Yeah, I did my undergrad at UF, and
really,
okay. Yeah, I didn't see snow till I was 31.
Oh no. Yes, right.
Like, ask a random question, but are we taking a break in the lecture?
What we are going to be doing once everyone comes back is exploring the museum's website to find artifacts, because one of our assignments coming up is the find an artifact and talk about it. So what we're going to do once everyone is back is look at the museum website. Everyone will pick an artifact, and then we'll just briefly tell us about it. Unless, Carl, do you have any favorites or things? I don't know if you have any secret stashes of artifacts that you can show us, or if we'll just use what's on the website.
Well, if you give me a second to screen share, one thing I can do.
Okay, that would be great.
Show you on the museum's website.
Yes. Okay.
I can also point you to a larger, collection of stuff too.
That would be great. Okay. So what we're going to be doing next is, I think in 2 weeks, we have our first assignment coming due, which is to find an artifact. So what we're going to be doing now is taking a look at some of the artifacts in the museum's collection. There are a lot available digitally on the museum website, but Carl also said he can point us to some, which will be interesting. So how many, Rob said that they have 14,000 objects. Do you have a sense of how many the Constitution Museum has?
Individual objects?
Yeah.
I do not.
Okay.
Probably around the same, or maybe a little bit more if you start to look at archival records too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the USS Constitution Museum was founded was started as a collection of objects on board the ship before it was established as a separate museum.
Yeah.
And we have continued to acquire both documents and physical objects ever since. So yeah.
Okay. So that's what we'll be doing. And are you ready, Carl, to share, or do you?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Okay.
So here we are at the front page of the USS Constitution Museum's website, which not surprisingly is located at ussconstitutionmuseum.org. I think you can also do usscm.org to get to here too. Our front page includes events and a bunch of other stuff. I encourage you to go explore it. There is a lot of fun stuff on here too. We have an entire separate page. Rob was talking about, gaming and learning through games. We have an entire separate website that is made up of a series of interactive games and sort of online, not even exhibits, but presentations, website presentations and stuff. And you can see all that on here. But if you look at our Discover and Learn tab under the collection, you can explore the collection, and this will take you to the main presentation page of all of our collection materials. It's organized by theme and story. So if you're looking for objects that you think might be of interest to you, of stuff that you want to, explore, you can do that by topic, whether it's individual people or topics such as navigation, events such as battles, portraits, et cetera, et cetera. The USS Constitution Museum has been going on since the early 70s. And we've developed quite a diverse collection of stuff that we are continuing to expand upon. So if you're interested in a biography of a person, if you're interested in some particular types of objects, you can see it all there. On any one of these sort of topical connections, you can explore a series of objects that are visually displayed and described as well, and use that as a line. From an academic standpoint, on all of these, the credit lines that you want to use are included in there for credit and for citations. But let me go back up to on the main Explore the Collections page here. You'll also see, in addition to everything that we've got here, you can also explore more of our collection of both physical objects and paper documents at the DPLA. And here, this is the Digital Public Library of America is an organization that is sort of a collaborative of libraries and museums and the like that are seeking to digitize resources like this. And so from an academic standpoint, if you're doing work and research, papers, presentations, whatever, this is an amazing resource, not just for Constitution, but for just about everything, especially right now when, because of COVID, it's so hard to get into libraries and archives. There's just a ton of stuff available here that normally you would have to go to a library or archive to view. the link from our website, from the museum's website, will take you to a huge list of Constitution-related artifacts that have been from our collection at the museum. The physical objects are all in our museum right here in Boston, but they've all been digitized and are presented up here. So anything, feel free to just, as you're looking for cool stuff that's of interest to you or things you think you want to do papers or projects about, just browse around, and you'll be kind of interested and stunned at some of the stories you'll find and the cool things that you'll see, scattered around. Seaman's Protection Certificate, just pulling something up totally at random here. This is a certificate that was carried by American seamen to prove that they were, in fact, an American sailor and could not be seized and put on board a British ship. There's a lot of academic research going into the history of these certificates and sort of the sense of American identity and American citizenship that comes out of the need for American sailors operating on ships on the high seas to be able to prove that they were in fact Americans and not British. As Rob suggested in talking about something a little earlier, there were in fact a number of American sailors who were seized and put on board British ships because it was presumed that they were British, of British origin, when Britain needed more sailors on their ships. And so there's a great academic history of these documents that suggests that this is really the beginnings of American citizenship documents, of what becomes the American passport. And American identity comes out of this need of sailors who were traveling all over the globe, far more than the rest of Americans, to be able to prove that. Just one random example.
Two things on that. One is Jeffrey Bolster. I mean, these certificates evolve, and Jeffrey Bolster has that book on Black sailors, really drawn from looking at these. This is really one of the few places where you're going to find race referenced in these identification things. And I'm not sure if it's in one of the documents that I posted the other day on the Barbary Wars, but when these 300 plus sailors from the Philadelphia are captured in Tripoli, Bainbridge, the captain, has this idea that since a lot of them are British, maybe we can get them released as British. And when that idea is floated to Lord Nelson, he says, well, if they are British, we would have no choice but to hang them as deserters if they're now serving under the American flag. So that idea goes nowhere. These are fascinating documents for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. So I encourage you, if you're looking for stuff to do projects on in this class, or frankly, for any of your other classes, to explore our page on the DPLA, as well as the rest of the document. This is a consortium of museums and libraries around the country that are digitizing their resources. And especially now in the midst of COVID, this is just an amazing resource for being able to look at original documents at a time when you can't even really go see them in person. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. Again, on the rest of our page, you'll see things organized. And if there is stuff that you are specifically interested in that you don't see, if you want to learn more about navigation and on a ship and do that, or medicine or whatever, and you have a specific question, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll do what I can to point you in the right direction. The objects here include some things like documents under the medicine category. You'll see a lot of notes. These were notes taken during medical lectures at the time in the beginning of the 1800s, kind of fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Also a list of all of the medicines that was carried on board one ship at the time period. Just an example. Other examples in totally different topics are individual events within the history of USS Constitution. The national cruise is kind of a fascinating one in its own right and a whole lot of fun. In the 1920s, they began a massive restoration of USS Constitution. That the ship was on the verge of being destroyed because it was in such horrific condition. In fact, at one point, the Secretary of the Navy had suggested towing it out and just using it for bombing practice. And it raised enough public interest that there was interest to having it restored, and there ended up being a national fundraising campaign and all of this. And this all happened right before the Depression. The Depression hit. And if that had happened just a couple of years later, it's unlikely they ever would have gotten the money to save the ship, and she probably would not exist now. So the fact that that campaign to rescue the ship and restore it occurred just before the Depression is pretty amazing timing. But then at the height of the Depression, the Navy decided to take the ship on a national tour to all these ports around the country to show it off to the public, and in part, to show them what they had paid for, but also as sort of a patriotic rallying point at the midst of the Great Depression when everyone was broke. And on this photo here, you can actually see the ship. It was not sailed, it was towed by another US Navy ship. But they went all the way down from New England to the Gulf Coast through the Panama Canal and all the way up the West Coast, turned around and came back. And we're very fortunate in the Constitution Museum to have the original scrapbooks that a number of the young men who were on the crew of the ship at the time kept of their big adventure on this national cruise when thousands of Americans came out to see the ship in all of these different ports. And so you can explore all of these scrapbooks that they kept on board for that adventurous trip, down through the Panama Canal and back up to all the way to Seattle and back. Just an example of some of the kinds of stuff that you'll find on board. There's also sections on individual significant crew members. And sometimes they're significant because they were historically well-known. Commander Isaac Hull, one of the famous commanders of the ship. And on here you can see objects that are in the museum's collection that belong to him and learn a little bit more about their significance. And for a commander like Hull, you can see a lot of this is fairly decorative, elaborate gold stuff. But we also have collections for much more, much simpler crew members. Gunner John Lord is a guy who, just by happenstance, we have a lot of material that belong to him. And the only reason we have this is because John was obsessed with labeling everything he owned with his name on it. And even after he died, the objects ended up getting passed down. And because it all had his name on it, as they became available, we were able to reconstruct this collection of John Lord's personal belongings. And actually, the last of these things that we acquired was a miniature portrait of him. Long before that, we didn't even know what he looked like. But we had his chest, his sea bag, his dress shirt, his powder horn. And it's objects like this, from a museum standpoint, from a history standpoint, are like a fascinating window. This guy wasn't famous. Nobody ever really knew who he was. He doesn't leave a whole lot of written records behind. But just because he labeled his stuff, we end up with this window into the objects and the lifestyle that made up an average Navy sailor at the time period, which I think is just really, really cool. You'll see stuff like that in some of the other collections. Purser Thomas Chew, the purser was a guy who kept track of the bookkeeping and accounting on board the ship. We have a number of his things. And unlike John Lord, Thomas Chew was a much fancier guy. And we have all sorts of things down to his sort of cummerbund stay that wrapped around his belly to make him look not so fat. and coral jewelry that he got for his wife in faraway ports. All kinds of fun stuff like this. So I encourage you to, again, browse around the site, just, play around, see what you find, see what you like. If there's nothing on the museum's website, again, go explore the DPLA and find objects that you think make really sort of interesting insights into aspects of history that you're interested in. Keep in mind too, this class is sort of built around Constitution, but the only reason that's really kind of a worthwhile topic in and of its own right is that we are a window into the broader American story, right? And the broader American maritime experience. And so every one of these things that are connected to Constitution, we at the museum certainly think they're significant because they're directly connected to the ship, but they're significant in their own rights for the other stories, the other historical stories that they connect to, and the other things that they tell us about American history and world history. So,
yeah. So why don't we do this? So let's everyone take 10 minutes now to look through the collections and find something. And when we come back, you'll tell us what you found, why you found it interesting, and what you can tell us about it. Okay, so you can now go to the website and look through the museum collections or the DPLA collection. Just find something that strikes you as interesting. Okay.
And if you go to the main page of the Constitution Museum website, you're going to see our current events stuff, but the link on the top to discover and learn, and then explore the collection will get you to any of that detail.
Hey, how are we doing? Good. So let's see, Sean, why don't you tell us what you have found? You can share your screen, I believe, too.
Alrighty, let me go ahead and do that. So I was looking through this newspaper article on the Yankee from like September 18th, 1812. And I was just looking through it, and it kind of caught my eye because last semester we did the town registry and stuff like that. So looking at these old documents are kind of familiar yet fun to me still.
Yeah.
And I actually have a question about that, by the way. So a lot of these things like have like the F for S. So like I know that that's a thing, but it seems a little inconsistent.
It is,
so
yeah.
What's the story behind that, if you wouldn't mind me asking?
Well, I can sometimes remember what it is. It seems like it's I thought it was a printing thing because it was easier to set that in, make that in type. But since I've heard, but it also then transfers into handwriting too. So I think based on what I know, and I see Carl nodding, if Carl starts shaking his head, I'll know that I'm way off. But yeah, it was because of print. It was easier to make the long F, what's called the long F or S, and as opposed to an S. But it's not consistent. Sometimes you find it you never find it at the beginning of a word, but often in the middle. And this, by the way, I ran into this last week in I think another class where I had gotten a document, actually a book published in the 1790s that had then been digitized. But instead of having the F or the S, they just omitted it entirely. When you're used to reading these documents, you don't even notice that. But when you don't have any S's, it took a while to get used to that. But that's it. It's just a convention at the time of using the long S. People pronounced it as S and didn't pronounce it as F, to my knowledge. Right. If I'm wrong, Carl will correct me. Okay.
No, that's generally on the money, and yeah, it definitely takes a little bit of getting used to if you haven't read it before, and it is inconsistent. One of the other things about all of these kinds of rules when you're looking at original documents from this time period is that definitely in people's handwriting,
yes.
But also even in structured print, the universal agreement on grammatical rules and presentation was nowhere near as strong as it is today.
Right.
And so, just looking at the screen you've got up here, Sean, if we look right down in the lower left-hand corner where it says Chew, the purser, has the flail F, but right below it, it says Guerriere is stated to be 15 killed. And the loss on board has those sort of the S's we're used to seeing. Yeah. So it's really inconsistent.
Yeah.
I don't recall the details, honestly, but Bob's right. It was the use of it was a printing press thing as much as anything else originally. But if you find yourself looking at handwritten documents from the time period and out of the collection, you'll see a lot of similar kinds of differences in the structure of handwritten letters. There just was, things were a lot more free form. In terms of what people did and how they wrote and what they chose to capitalize and not capitalize and use of punctuation.
Right,
so Sean, was there something else other than that struck you? I also noticed that 7 has the long S when I had said, don't find it at the beginning of words. So,
well, I think I'm going to keep reading through this because on the second page, I found the report of the Guerriere and the Constitution's battle. Yeah. But then on the front page of it, let's see if I can back up. On the front page, there's like this talk about political miscellany, which is just like something, I'd never even heard of this guy. So that instantly caught my attention as well.
DeWitt Clinton, yes. He is the responsible for the Erie Canal. Governor of New York, candidate for president, probably one of the most important political figures of the period. So again, it also reminds us that people who loom really large in our day will be forgotten, but here you have, someone who loomed large in his day, and most of us have never heard of DeWitt Clinton. And he was the nephew of George Clinton, not the Grand Master of Funk, but the governor of New York.
Newspapers are awesome in this
They
regard,
are.
and we're constantly collecting them at the museum
Yeah.
from all different time periods, because they do exactly that. They bring you down to that immediacy.
Yeah.
Don't overlook any advertising too,
Right,
and personal
right.
notices and classified advertising.
Yeah.
You'll see that as well too.
Mhm.
Some of
Great.
that's really fascinating
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
What you'll see a lot of ship captains coming into northern ports and declaring that upon arrival they discovered that there was a runaway slave on board, and that they would post it as a notice to the public to declare that they knew that this person was on board, but they found out too late after they left port and were unable to return. And it kind of got them off the hook when that person landed in a northern port and was able to flee.
Yeah. No, that's
Just
great.
a random example of the kind of fun stuff you can find in newspaper classified ads.
Yeah. And you can see this 1812 is an election year. So DeWitt Clinton was actually running against James Madison for president. So yeah, good. There's a lot. It looks like there'll be a lot of good stuff in there. Okay, good. Let's see. Megan, what did you find?
Sorry, I don't do a lot of screen sharing, so
Okay.
I'm trying to see if it.
How do I stop, by the way? Screen sharing.
Yep, here you are.
Did mine come out?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. So when I was looking through, I saw William Bainbridge, and we read a bunch of his letters. So I was like, oh, I'll click on him. And then I saw this like wine bottle, and it says that in that time period they had like a wine bottle that they would like reuse. So that was like his signature wine bottle that he'd like hold around. And I thought that was something cool because it's not something that obviously exists anymore, really.
Yeah, your own personal wine bottle.
Why wouldn't you?
That probably now it would be safer than sharing one. If you're having your own. Yeah, interesting. So that's made of glass. About how big is it? Can you tell from? Does it tell you in the image?
I don't know.
You will. I believe there are actually measurements on it. Yes, dimensions.
There it is. Yeah, I was gonna say I have information at the bottom.
Wow.
There it is.
So
that was cool.
Yeah. Wow.
Things too. I thought this was cool too. The day or night telescope.
Oh yeah.
How I'm surprised that they had like the technology to know to let in less light back then when I was using day or night.
That is interesting. So when is that from roughly?
So it says 1800 to 1843.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, if you're interested in optics and stuff like that, Megan or anybody else, we have a lot of sort of this kind of glassware telescopes, a couple sextants, octants, things like that, optical glass optics and stuff in the collection. And you can definitely find more that is connected to the shipment story, but may not even be part of our museum. But again, on the DPLA site.
Fascinating. Good. Thank you.
Of course. See if I can figure this out.
Great.
Okay.
Let's see. Sarah, what did you find?
I'm gonna screen share right now. So what I found was the portrait of George Ipsara Syrian, and what first struck me about him was that he was so he was just really young. So that's what originally drew me in. And I found out that in this portrait, he's probably about 10 to 12 years old. And so he was abandoned or orphaned. He was put on a ship by his mother in 1824 to escape massacre in Greece. And in 1827, that's when he joined the USS Constitution. And so he was about 9 years old at that point. And I wasn't aware that children that young were crew members. I mean, he was just his rank was literally boy or just ordinary seaman. But what I also found really interesting about him is that he kind of had this really nice transition into his naval career. Like he was very successful, and like even today he has an award that's given in his name annually, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Naval Hall of Fame, I guess that would be. Yeah, so I thought it was like a really good like American story of kind of like rising out of.
That is a great story. Yeah. So what's the award? Who's it given to?
It's a service award. Let me see. It said it's back here. Oh, I'm not quite sure what happened.
Well, I didn't mean to.
Sorry.
I mean, you're doing really well, and then I started asking these questions as though.
Sorry, I don't know.
Instead of 10 minutes, as though you had just spent your life studying George Syrian.
But it was, yeah, it's a service award. I think it's given to like a high-ranking member in the naval like service.
Okay. Interesting. That's interesting. That is great.
We have historians looking into the biography of George Syrian who are still sort of digging in to find out. There were, Syrian was one of a number of young people who came aboard at the same time, and we're still trying to identify a couple of the other ones who are mentioned in the crew log at the time that they were first sort of, taken on board, if you want. But George is significant because he rose up through the ranks and became really prominent as a gunner on board, and not just in Constitution, but throughout a long naval career after that. So yeah, he's definitely your sort of like prototype American success story, right? Like the rescued orphan from some collapsing country, who then, makes his way up through the military chain of command to become this, well-respected leader. So it's a fun story in that regard for sure.
I thought it was really interesting too, how he is, to my understanding, he's the only sailor to serve 3 on-duty tours of the Constitution. So
yeah,
that's like a pretty
yeah, 3 different times in his career he was on board.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It helps when you start that young.
Yeah, I mean, he was 9 years old. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Let's see. Ray, can you tell us what you found?
Yes, let me share my screen. I can't share.
Well, you can tell us what you found.
I found a sextant.
Okay.
The Jedney King sextant and box interest me quite a bit because navigation before radar and other modern technologies was quite a laborious and dangerous affair if it went wrong. I'm quite fascinated by that because I don't know much about that. I've studied mostly more modern ships, so learning about older ships and how things were done is a great deal of interest to me, so I could compare the 2 areas of study.
Carl's going to share it. Thanks,
Thank
Carl.
you.
Oh wow. So do you know how you would use that? You just found it, so I'm not going to say.
I just found it. I don't know anything about how to use it.
Okay. Carl, can you shed any light on how you would use a sextant?
Shed any light?
Yeah.
Sorry, is that a celestial navigation joke?
No, I didn't think so. If it was, I don't think it was very funny.
Okay, I'll tell you it is.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a number, one of a number of these that we have in the collection, and a sextant was a successor to the octant. They're so named because they measure on the arc either 1/6 of a circle or 1/8 of a circle for an octant. But what these are doing actually is measuring the angular altitude of the sun or stars above the horizon. And so since you couldn't use sort of a plumb bob on a ship because it would roll around, you're using the horizon as a reference point And then with this held up, measuring the angle between, well, actually, measuring the angle between the horizon and where you're seeing either the star or the sun or whatever it is. These are, that information initially could tell you what latitude you were located at, which in itself is significant. But then later on, with the help of a nautical almanac, you can actually use it to determine longitude as well, how far east and west you are, as well as how far north and south you are. The mathematics behind doing that, behind, you know, converting that angular measurement into like usable information, can be daunting and has changed dramatically over time. So this was a tool and a technique that tended to be limited in its use to officers in charge, and you know, the more educated and likely to be in charge of the navigation of the ship, as opposed to you know, your standard seamen who were learning instead how to climb knots, tie knots and climb the rigging.
Right.
The methodologies for doing this changed dramatically over time, and but it was central to figuring out where you were at sea. It still is tools like this, and I'm looking around for, oh, it's in a closet. I've got a couple of these myself. Sextants, which measure a sixth of a circle, octants, quadrants, all are still able to be used today and are still taught and used today, even in the era of GPS, as a means of finding out where you are at sea.
Wow, amazing.
If you want to learn more about it, don't hesitate to ping me or email me, and I can send you some resources.
Great. Maybe we could do an exercise sometime on how to navigate, because that's such a complicated thing. Good. Good. Well, thank you. Thanks, Ray. Let's see. Michael, what did you find?
Yeah, let me see if I can share.
Well, let me de-share.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so basically, I'm also in another history class that's called Death, Disease, and Healing, and this list here is basically a list of medicines and instruments that were brought upon the U.S. Navy ship, the New York. This list was drawn up by the surgeon Peter St. Medard. He was actually a surgeon on the USS Constitution for the Quasi-War, during the Quasi-War with France. He was discharged in 1801, and then this list was actually drawn up in 1802 to be brought aboard the New York. But it was actually really interesting. The reason why I chose this piece was because it was kind of interesting to see some of the list of medicines or like supplies that they would actually use on the ship, and kind of drawing a line between, you know, in our most previous class, Death, Disease, and Healing, we were kind of talking about it in 1721 when they were dealing with smallpox in the colony, but like drawing a line between what they were using then and like where that advanced to less than 100 years later. And some of the items on this list, I mean, they were so common. They said that you could find them in like a grocery store nowadays. They brought on like cinnamon and cream of tartar, stuff like that. It was just really interesting to see on the list.
It's interesting. So they would be using those as medicines. I mean, these.
I assume they were using them in like remedies, like not just by themselves, but rather making a
to mix things.
Some sort.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, Michael, if you're interested in that stuff, we also have logbooks from physicians on board the ship that are incorporated into the ship's logs, and you can track through some of those, you know, how they were treating different diseases on board and what they were treating, and sort of the approach they were taking to it. And so, in terms of kind of comparing the list and seeing, well, you know, what would you have used this for? while we don't have a specific how-to guide from physicians' logbooks, we're able to kind of discern, some of the diseases and stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Interesting. Wow, interesting. Let's see, Trevor, what did you find?
Let me pull it up.
Wow.
Can you all see that?
Yes.
So it is a speaking trumpet. So pretty self-explanatory as to what it does, but I found it interesting because it had like such far range. So it says in here that they would use it to like send commands around the ship, and they would also use it to talk to other ships. So like the knowledge of bullhorns and other stuff like that I have of the ones today is that they could not do something like that. So I thought it was interesting that they had this capability with such like a simple instrument. I also thought that this mouth shape was kind of weird, because if you know how a normal like music trumpet works, you kind of have to like pucker your lips and project, but I don't know how you would really do that when yelling in order.
Yeah, you can't pucker your lips and yell. Yeah.
So I thought that just that's kind of what brought my interest to it. I don't know if Carl, you know how that would work.
Yeah, if I can't remember if this is the only image of this particular one or not, but if you see it in real life, that mouthpiece is a little bit bigger than it looks. And the analogy I like to make is, if you imagine like just cupping your hands around your mouth like this, you're essentially trying to create that same effect, right? And project out. And so the mouthpiece is just big enough that you could move your lips, but probably not enunciate with your whole mouth. It is kind of fascinating. We have imagery sketches actually done by sailors at the time period, not specifically on Constitution, but on British ships of the same time period, that show the officer of the deck always having one of these slung over their shoulder, ready to issue orders across the deck to the crew. Yeah. And then
what these were for?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just a strap holder. Yeah. And then speaking trumpets like this stay super popular, not just for communication across the deck of the ship, but if you could get close enough to another ship to speak to them without like trying to launch a small boat and send somebody over, you would do that as well too. On not just military ships, but on commercial ships coming and going. If you saw another ship at sea, quite frequently you would, stop and engage them, presuming they were friendly, and learn the news, what's going on, exchange letters if it was feasible. But in cases where you may not have had a small boat to go over, it's too rough to do that, whatever, you could still maneuver the two ships close enough side by side that using speaking trumpets, you could shout general messages back and forth to each other.
What is like the actual size of this? Like, is it
if you scroll down, you should see dimensions on it. And this particular one, I'm trying to remember, I want to say it's like about 18 inches.
I'm not
or
seeing
so. Yeah.
Down. Go down a little
but
bit.
If you're interested, I can dig up the specs from our object database for you.
It doesn't
not that
seem
important.
to have,
I just kind of wanted like a ballpark.
No, it would be interesting to know how big it is. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Good. Well, this has been, I think each of you found something really interesting. And I like the fact that you found different media, that is print, handwritten, and then objects, the painting of George Sirian, and then the speaking trumpet, the bottle, the telescope, the sextant, a newspaper. It's really an amazing array of things they have. So the idea is, and you only had 10 minutes, and I think you all did really well finding something and then talking about its significance. So So then, spend some more time just looking through what the museum has, what's on the DPLA site, and, find something that really interests you or that you can use to tell a story as you've done now. This has been interesting. I found something, let me just share it. This was supposed to be your turn to talk, but I can't be stopped. And let me see if I can find this. Actually, I found a couple of things. Let's see. Here we go. This is the Battle of Lake Erie, and this is the dramatic scene when Oliver Hazard Perry is being rowed from the wreckage of the Lawrence to the Niagara, and he carries with him the flag that says, "Don't give up the ship." So that's great drama. You can see the rough lake, and at the end of the battle is when Perry sent his message to the Secretary of the Navy that we have met the enemy and they are ours, which is, so there you have it. Something for everyone in the Constitution Museum's collections. Okay. Anything else we should talk about? And thank you, Megan, for taking a look at the letters of Bainbridge. We'll be talking more about those in a subsequent week. And I'm glad you did get it. Did anyone else read the pile of documents I was sending you yesterday? Okay, good. Well, we'll have time to talk about them then, and that'll give you more time to read those as well as explore the museum's collections. And good. Any questions? Yes, Sarah.
I know that the artifact assignment is due next class.
It's 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, 2 weeks. Okay. Well, I was just going to ask for clarification on like how you want us to structure that, what you want us to include, if that's not going to be included in like the assignment.
Well, I think what you all just did is really what we're looking for. I mean, you took the portrait of George Syrian, and that's the first thing that struck you, and then you told us the story of George Syrian. So that's essentially it. And I was thinking you could make a short video just telling, so it's not just you telling us now, but something we could then post on the blog. Here's the object I found, and just something relatively short about it, but enough so it conveys what the significance is. And also then have a link so that a person can see, the provenance of it, the citation for it, which Carl was pointing out. So that's essentially it, about a 2-3 minute video about the importance of this thing, how it was used, what it tells us, what's cool about it, why you found this interesting, why this object really captured you. Okay. So this was actually a good preview of that. And you all did really, I'm really now looking forward to seeing what you find in the collections.
Megan, do you have a question?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to ask about the blog posts. I know we had to do the intro one, but I know we're supposed to like comment on other people's too, but for some reason when I log in, I can only see my own. Like I can't see any other blog posts to comment on. Like, is that like, do I have to like look somewhere else for it? Would it not be?
No, they should be there. And Megan, it could be because who else has been posting on the blog? See, there's your answer. So far, you're the only one. And so yes, Trevor.
I couldn't figure it out. I'm not sure like where the edit button is or like create post. I'm not sure if I have to do something to sign up. You said that I think like I was already signed up, but
you are signed up. Okay, let me see if I can, I should have opened this so that we could look at it. Let me just see if I can find it.
I'm also having trouble, Professor.
Okay.
With the blog. It's a bit wonky. I wish we could just do the posting on like just the discussion board and the Blackboard.
Okay, let us see. Okay, so here is the blog. And let me just put this out of the way. And you can see up here where it says new, and it says post, media, link, page. So you click post, and what should come up is add a new post. and you put in a title here. Then you write down here, adding media. This button will open up the media library. In order for you to post anything, your image, you have to have posted it in here. So you can upload a file here. Just select a file. And let's see. Okay. So see, I've just clicked on a file that's on my computer, and I've just added it here. And then I can, let me just get this out of the way. Let's see, go back to my insert into post. So now I put that into the post. And then you hit publish, and that should be on the blog. I want to edit it. If I want to edit it, I can do this. Let's see. Hit edit post. And there it is. So I'm going to want to edit it. So I hit edit. I think. Anyway, fairly simple. I'm going to title it Picture of the Airport. There we go. So now we update it. And I have to tell you, if I can figure out how to do this, there's no reason why, anyone can't. I literally am any idiot who can figure out how to do something. And the advantage of doing it on this media as opposed to on Blackboard is this is accessible to a wider audience as well as, and I find Blackboard really hard to use. Okay. So that's it. Let me just check to see who the users are and make sure you're all on. It looks like you all are. Okay. Very good. Stop sharing. Any other questions? Okay, well then, if you do, you know how to find me, or you know how to find Carl, and I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Professor.
Great, take care.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
Good to see you.
Couple of questions, Professor.
Yes.
Few about the blog. So can I just access it from Blackboard because I've been having issues?
No, it is via the internet. So you go to sites.suffolk.edu. You should come to the blog.
Okay.
Or it's not accessible via Blackboard.
Thanks. And one other thing. So this is a bit random, but I've been looking for summer opportunities, like an internship, in the field of history, and I've decided I want to do something with maritime history.
Okay.
How would I find something like that?
Good
because
question.
I'm really interested in the subject.
Well, Professor Lasdow is the person who handles the internships, and so she would be one resource. And the other is, I mean, most places that are looking for interns, this is probably a good time. On the other hand, since most of the museums are unsure what they're going to be doing over the summer, the thing to do would be to contact places that may have possible opportunities. So, and the MIT Museum actually has the Hart Nautical Collection. And then whereabouts do you live?
Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. So it really does require just legwork. I'm contacting places to see what kind of opportunities they may have or what use they may have. But I would also check with Professor Lasdow, who keeps our any kind of file on that to see what's available. Okay.
Thank you.
And I will keep my ears open as well.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Sorry for clogging the airways today.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's it's good to have you. So thank you. Thanks for speaking up.
Have a good day, Professor.
You too. Take care. See.